Donald Eugene Chambers was born in 1930 in Houston, Texas, a city that would one day become home base for one of the most notorious outlaw biker clubs on the planet. Growing up in post-war America, where everyone was expected to toe the line and keep it clean, Chambers didn't quite fit in. He had a rebellious streak early on, the kind that doesn't just fade away. That rebellious edge would end up shaping the rest of his life. By the time the 1960s rolled around, Chambers had done his time in the Marine Corps. That experience left its mark. He came out tougher, sharper, and hooked on the kind of brotherhood that only the military could offer. But once he got out and returned to regular civilian life, everything felt dull, too quiet, too normal. He missed the danger, the sense of purpose, and the tight bonds with people who had his back no matter what. Then came motorcycles. In the 60s, outlaw motorcycle clubs were booming across the US. The Hells Angels were already a feared force in California. The Outlaws owned the Midwest, and groups like the Pagans and Mongols were rising fast. But Texas was still up for grabs, and Chambers saw his chance. He'd been hanging around local motorcycle clubs for a while, but none of them had that raw, lawless energy he was looking for. Most were small time, more into weekend rides than making waves. Chambers wasn't interested in playing small. He didn't want to just ride, he wanted to build an empire. He respected the structure of the Hells Angels, but had no interest in joining them. Texas had its own culture, its own pride, and Chambers wanted something that reflected that spirit. He dreamed of a club built around Texan and Southwestern outlaw roots, something wild, loyal, and not afraid to get a little violent. Inspired by legendary Mexican bandits like Pancho Villa, Chambers decided on a theme for his new club, a group of modern-day outlaws who answered to no one. In 1966, in San Leon, Texas, he made it real. The Bandidos Motorcycle Club was born. The club's red and gold colors weren't chosen at random. They were loud, bold, and hard to ignore, just like the men who wore them. The logo? A cartoon-style Mexican bandit wearing a sombrero, holding a pistol and a machete. It sent a clear message. This wasn't a group to mess with. It screamed danger, rebellion, and total defiance of authority. The name Bandidos was no accident either. Chambers saw his crew as the modern-day bandits, riding across the country, taking what they wanted, and living by their own rules. It started small, just a tight crew of ex-military men, ex-cons, and drifters looking for more than boring jobs and weekend rides. Chambers handpicked the early members, making sure they were tough, loyal, and not afraid to throw down for the club. Some were Vietnam vets dealing with PTSD, anger, and addictions, guys who just couldn't go back to regular life. Others were hardened criminals or bikers kicked out of weaker clubs. What they all had in common was that they were ready for something real, something raw. Chambers built the club like a military unit. Everyone had a role, and nobody got respect handed to them. You had to earn it. To wear the Bandidos patch, you had to prove yourself with loyalty, guts, and a serious commitment to the brotherhood. From the start, the Bandidos lived wild. Their motto, "We are the people our parents warned us about," wasn't just a cool slogan. It was a promise. The club dove headfirst into booze, drugs, women, and plenty of chaos. Bar fights, underground gambling, and drug deals were all part of the lifestyle. They didn't just party. They raised hell and funded their operations, doing whatever it took. In the world of the Bandidos, loyalty was everything. Betray the club, show weakness, or step out of line, and you could end up badly beaten, or worse. Fear and respect went hand in hand, and the Bandidos weren't aiming to be just another motorcycle club. They wanted to dominate, and if someone disrespected them, the answer was usually violence. Chambers didn't mess around when it came to discipline. He ran the club like a military unit, tight, no room for softness, and absolutely no second-guessing his orders. If a member disrespected the patch or backed down from a fight, there were serious consequences. No exceptions. It didn't take long for the Bandidos to become the top dogs in Texas. But Chambers wasn't planning on stopping there. He started pushing into nearby states, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Mississippi. The club began making serious money through drug trafficking, mostly meth and weed, along with smuggling guns and moving stolen goods. As they grew, so did the heat. The Hells Angels started paying attention. Smaller Texas-based clubs had to either join up or get shoved out. Some fought back, and when they did, things got violent. Bar fights, highway brawls, even shootouts in clubhouses. By the early 1970s, the Bandidos had locked down Texas, but they were making enemies fast. The Hells Angels weren't happy. The Outlaws MC, who ran much of the Midwest, didn't like the expansion either. And the cops, they were all over it. The FBI and Texas Rangers started keeping close tabs on the club, especially once their criminal operations became more obvious. But Chambers didn't flinch. He saw violence as just part of the game. Respect in the outlaw world came at a cost, and often that cost was blood. What started as a gang of misfits and rebels riding together had now turned into a full-on criminal organization, and they were about to be tested like never before. Chambers wasn't your typical businessman, but he knew how to run things, just not legally. Under his leadership, the Bandidos dove deep into the world of organized crime. Drugs, extortion, weapons smuggling, you name it, they were doing it. Their early cash came from smuggling meth and marijuana through Texas and into Mexico. And of course, law enforcement started paying serious attention. Meanwhile, tension with the Hells Angels was heating up. Chambers wasn't about to let the Bandidos be pushed around, though. He encouraged his crew to fight back when needed, and if things got messy inside the club, that was handled too. Disloyalty could get you beaten or killed. Members were expected to give everything to the patch, or else. By the mid-70s, the Bandidos were popping up outside Texas, chapters in Louisiana, Mississippi, even California. But the more they grew, the more problems came with it. And in 1972, things took a dark turn. One night in El Paso, Chambers and a few of his men lured two drug dealers, Raymond State Casas and Richard Mara, to a motel. The two were suspected of skimming money from club deals, and Chambers wasn't about to let that slide. What happened next was cold and calculated. They shot the two men and dumped their bodies in the desert. But what Chambers didn't realize was that the law was already closing in. The murders caught the FBI's attention, and they started digging deeper into the Bandidos' world. Chambers thought he was untouchable. He wasn't. In 1974, federal agents had enough evidence to arrest him for the killings. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. With their founder locked up, the Bandidos faced a major turning point. Would they fall apart without him? Not a chance. The club had grown too big, too organized, and too determined to stop. Even while Chambers sat behind bars, the Bandidos kept expanding, this time overseas. Chapters opened up in Australia, Europe, and beyond. Chambers died in prison in 1999, but his legacy never left the club. He hadn't just built a gang, he'd created a global outlaw brand, one that would outlive him by decades and continue to be a major force in the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs. And then came Jeffrey Fatboy Pike, a man who'd take the Bandidos to an entirely new level. Born and bred in Texas, Pike wasn't just another biker looking for a patch. He was a thinker, a planner, someone with a vision. Under his leadership, the Bandidos grew even bigger, tougher, and more feared, cementing their place as one of the most powerful outlaw motorcycle clubs in the world. By 1998, Jeffrey Fatboy Pike had already built a name for himself within the Bandidos. He was known as a guy who could get stuff done, no matter what it took. Ruthless, smart, and quietly ambitious, he rose through the ranks and, in 2006, officially took the reins as the national president. And from day one, he got to work tightening his grip on the club. Under Pike, the Bandidos shifted gears. Sure, they'd always been into illegal stuff, drugs, extortion, the usual outlaw business. But Pike took it all to another level. He built deeper connections with Mexican drug cartels, especially the Gulf Cartel. With their help, the club secured a steady pipeline of meth and cocaine flowing through Texas and across the U.S. It was big time, organized, and dangerous. One thing Pike didn't tolerate: disloyalty. He cleaned house fast. Anyone he saw as weak, troublesome, or disloyal got cut off, and not just kicked out. Some of them vanished completely, their bodies later found in shallow graves, shot up and dumped like trash. Pike ruled with fear and absolute control. As the Bandidos expanded their reach, so did the problems. One of the bloodiest periods under Pike's leadership came during a war with a smaller club called the Cossacks MC. The Cossacks had been operating in Texas under the Bandidos' shadow for a while, basically paying their dues to exist. But by the early 2000s and 10s, they'd had enough. they wanted out. They stopped paying, started acting independently, and worst of all, they rocked the Texas bottom rocker on their vests, something the Bandidos saw as straight-up disrespect. Over the next couple of years, things got ugly. We're talking ambushes, assassinations, and bombings across Scandinavia. In March 1995, the Hells Angels hit a Bandidos clubhouse in Finland, killing one member and injuring several more. The Bandidos fired back hard a few months later, ambushing a Hells Angels leader in Sweden and leaving him barely clinging to life. In July that year, a grenade was lobbed into a Hells Angels clubhouse in Denmark, leaving a trail of injuries behind. By 1996, both sides were done playing. They upped their firepower, military-grade weapons, machine guns, explosives, even grenade launchers. The turning point? A rocket-propelled grenade attack by the Bandidos on the Hells Angels Copenhagen clubhouse. It killed one biker and wounded several more. This was no longer just biker turf wars. This was war with military weapons, right in the middle of European cities. Then, in September 1996, two Hells Angels were gunned down in a machine gun ambush in Sweden. A month later, a top Bandido was shot dead while sitting in his car in Norway. Retaliation followed fast. In November, the Hells Angels bombed a Bandidos hangout in Finland. These weren't back alley fights anymore. These were battles being fought on city streets, near homes and restaurants. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. Public fear hit an all-time high. Governments across Scandinavia finally had enough. Police launched massive crackdowns, raiding clubhouses, seizing weapons, and arresting members by the dozen. But the biggest moment of the war came on March 10th, 1997. That day, at Copenhagen Airport, a hit squad of Hells Angels ambushed a group of high-ranking Bandidos who had just landed from Helsinki. They opened fire with automatic weapons in broad daylight, killing the Bandidos' national president, Uffe Larsson, and critically injuring others. It was a brazen public execution, something straight out of a war zone, and it sent shockwaves through Europe. That was the last straw. After nearly 4 years of bloodshed, the two clubs finally sat down. Under pressure from police and even their own members, Bandido leader Jim Tindon and Hells Angels heavyweight Bent Blondie Nielsen agreed to a truce in 1997. But peace didn't mean the violence ended completely. Both clubs stayed active in the underground world, drug smuggling, weapons trafficking, and turf wars with other gangs. By the end of the Nordic War, there had been 11 deaths, 74 injuries, and over 100 shootings and bombings. It forced governments across the region to pass tougher anti-biker laws and carry out mass arrests. But even then, the outlaw lifestyle kept rolling. And the bloodshed wasn't just limited to Europe. One of the most infamous biker battles in Australian history exploded on September 2nd, 1984, in a brutal shootout now known as the Milpera Massacre. It happened at the Viking Tavern in Milpera, New South Wales, a place that was supposed to be hosting a swap meet for bikers to trade parts and gear. Instead, it turned into a war zone. 7 people were killed that day, including a 14-year-old girl, and dozens more were injured. It was a turning point in Australia's outlaw biker scene, one that put the Bandidos on the map in the worst way possible. It all started with an internal feud inside the Comanchero Motorcycle Club, one of the most feared clubs in Australia at the time. Led by Jock Ross, a strict military-style Scotsman, the club ran under an iron-fisted rule. But in 1983, a group of senior members, led by Anthony Snodgrass Spencer, had enough of Ross's dictatorship. So they split. And they didn't just form their own group. They reached out to the Bandidos in the US, got official approval, and founded the first Australian chapter of the Bandidos MC. To Ross, that move was straight up betrayal, and he wasn't about to let it slide. What began as club politics quickly turned into a full-scale biker war. For months, both sides stocked up on weapons: shotguns, pistols, machetes, even baseball bats. Threats were made, tensions rose. And then came the swap meet in Milpera. Over 50 armed members from both clubs rolled into the Viking Tavern that day. They weren't there to shop. They came for a fight. What followed was an all-out battle in broad daylight. Guns blazing, people screaming, blood on the pavement. When it was all over, 7 people lay dead, and dozens more were wounded. It was one of the deadliest moments in Australia's outlaw history. and it changed the landscape forever. The massacre triggered a massive crackdown on biker gangs, with law enforcement going after clubs harder than ever before. Around 1:40 p.m., things at the Viking Tavern in Milpera took a deadly turn. What started as a tense standoff between the Bandidos and the Comancheros exploded into chaos. No one really knows who pulled the trigger first, but in seconds, gunfire erupted, both outside in the car park and inside the tavern itself. It was mayhem. Dozens of bikers started blasting away at each other at close range. People who were just there to hang out or browse the swap meet ran for cover as bullets flew through bodies, bikes, and cars. The whole thing went on for almost 10 minutes, loud, brutal, and non-stop. By the time the dust settled, 7 people were dead. 4 Comancheros, 2 Bandidos, and tragically, a 14-year-old girl named Leanne Walters, an innocent bystander who had nothing to do with any of it. On top of that, 28 others were seriously hurt, some from gunshots, others from beatings. The Milpera massacre shocked the entire country. Australia had never seen anything like it. In the weeks that followed, police launched one of the biggest investigations in the nation's history. They arrested 43 members from both clubs. After a long and intense trial, 7 men were convicted of murder in 1987, with others copping lesser charges for manslaughter and firearms offenses. The fallout was massive. The massacre led to tougher anti-biker laws and forced clubs to go underground, operating more discreetly. But despite all the bloodshed, the Bandidos kept growing. They became a dominant force in Australia's outlaw biker scene. Jock Ross, the founder of the Comancheros, survived the war but lost control of his club. Under new leadership, the Comancheros would go on to become one of Australia's most dangerous and notorious gangs. The Milpera massacre still stands as one of the darkest, most violent chapters in Aussie biker history. But the story of the Bandidos doesn't stop there. They've had violent run-ins with rival clubs all over the world. While they started in the US, they've made serious moves in Europe and Australia too, often leaving a trail of blood behind. Some of the most infamous biker brawls have taken place in Texas, Colorado, and Germany, with the Bandidos clashing with clubs like the Hells Angels, Mongols MC, and Cossacks over turf, drug routes, and good old-fashioned biker politics. One of the worst and most public biker shootouts in US history happened on May 17, 2015, at Twin Peaks Restaurant in Waco, Texas. That day, tensions between the Bandidos and the Cossacks MC reached a boiling point. The Cossacks were a smaller up-and-coming club, but they'd started pushing boundaries, wearing the Texas bottom rocker on their vests, which the Bandidos saw as a major sign of disrespect. They also stopped paying tribute to the Bandidos, which only made things worse. On the day of the shootout, dozens of bikers from both clubs showed up for a coalition of clubs meeting, basically a sit-down between various MCs. But whatever plans there were for peace didn't last. An argument broke out in the car park, fists flew, and then came the gunfire, and knives, and chaos. When it was over, 9 bikers were dead, 18 more were injured, and nearly 200 people were arrested. Bullets had flown through the parking lot and into the restaurant. Police had been watching the meeting and quickly stepped in. Some say they made the situation worse, others say they saved lives. Either way, the scene was a bloodbath. The Waco shootout marked a major shift in how authorities dealt with biker gangs in Texas. It led to widespread raids, a ton of indictments, and years of courtroom drama. But in the end, many of the charges were dropped, leaving people wondering what really happened that day. And just when things seemed to be cooling down, another violent showdown erupted, this time in Denver, Colorado. On January 30th, 2016, members of the Bandidos and the Mongols clashed during the Colorado Motorcycle Expo, a big event for riders, vendors, and clubs. It had always been a pretty chill gathering, but not that year. According to witnesses, a fight broke out between the two groups. It started with shouting, then turned into full-blown violence. Gunfire rang out inside the packed event hall. One Mongols member was shot and killed, and several others were stabbed or beaten during the chaos. Cops shut the whole thing down and launched an investigation, but as usual, few bikers were willing to talk. The silence just added to the mystery, and the rivalry between the Bandidos and Mongols only grew deeper. While the Bandidos are still strongest in the US, their reach in Europe, especially in places like Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and Finland, is serious. And with that expansion has come even more violence. The Bandidos' rise in Germany brought them head-to-head with the dominant force in the country's biker underworld, the Hells Angels. For years, the Hells Angels had controlled much of the German outlaw motorcycle scene. But when the Bandidos showed up, they didn't come quietly. Between 2009 and 2012, Germany saw a wave of biker violence that looked more like a war zone than a turf dispute. Shootouts, bombings, and calculated assassinations became common as the two clubs clashed over control of territory, drug routes, and underground influence. One of the most brutal battles erupted in March 2010 in the city of Ruhr. A street brawl between over 20 bikers quickly turned into a firefight. When police arrived, they found several members from both sides shot or critically injured. The scene was littered with automatic weapons, handguns, and knives, more like a military raid than a gang scuffle. Then, in April 2012, tensions boiled over in Berlin. A Hells Angels member was gunned down outside a nightclub, hit by Bandidos affiliates in what authorities believe was retaliation for a previous attack. The murder shook the city, and German authorities wasted no time launching a nationwide crackdown. Dozens of biker clubhouses were raided, weapons seized, and high-ranking members arrested. The violence became so relentless that the German government started banning entire Bandidos and Hells Angels chapters. Some members went underground, others fled the country or relocated to regions where police heat was lower. But the war had already left its mark, and the streets remembered. Through it all, one symbol united these outlaw riders: the 1% patch. In the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, that small diamond-shaped patch is one of the most feared and respected emblems you can wear. For the Bandidos, it's more than just a badge. It's a commitment to living outside the law. It's a declaration that they aren't part of the 99% of bikers who just ride for fun. They're the 1% who live by their own rules, and they're proud of it. The legend of the 1% patch dates back to 1947, after a notorious riot broke out during a motorcycle rally in Hollister, California. The chaos made national headlines. In response, the American Motorcyclist Association tried to calm the public by saying, 99% of motorcyclists are law-abiding citizens. The outlaw clubs took that number and wore it like armor. The 1% became their identity and their warning. For a Bandido, wearing that patch isn't just about attitude. It means pledging total loyalty to the club, above the law, above family, above everything. Respect isn't given. It's earned through violence, sacrifice, and obedience. Stepping out of line, showing weakness, or cooperating with law enforcement is the ultimate betrayal, and it can be fatal. The club runs like a military unit, complete with a rigid hierarchy. At the top is the national president, then vice presidents, sergeants at arms, and road captains. Full patch members are the club's backbone. Below them are prospects, recruits who have to prove themselves, often through illegal activity or acts of violence. And at the bottom are hangarounds, outsiders trying to earn their way in. Bandidos don't talk club business with outsiders. That's an unspoken rule. And in places where rival MCs are making moves, members are always ready for war. It's not just about riding bikes, it's about holding power, protecting territory, and maintaining reputation. From the Twin Peaks shootout in Texas to the Nordic biker war, the Bandidos have shown the world what the 1% lifestyle really means: bloodshed, brotherhood, and total defiance. Governments have tried to shut them down. In places like Germany and Australia, entire chapters have been outlawed, but the club survives, thrives even. The Bandidos continue to grow in the US, Canada, Europe, and Latin America. Police pressure may slow them down, but it hasn't stopped them. Because for those who wear the red and gold and carry the 1% patch on their back, this life isn't just about rebellion. It's about loyalty, power, and an outlaw code that doesn't bend for anyone.